The Daughter of Auschwitz is our first book, and it's the story of one of the youngest survivors of the Holocaust, Tova Friedman. Michelle, you and I have both been reading this book. Tell us all about it.
Well, it's not an easy read, right? This is not one of your fiction books about the Holocaust where there is an easy, clean narrative of, say, a victim and an oppressor. The Daughter of Auschwitz, and it's got this, even the cover is quite sad. It's leading you into a really sad memoir. So this is the actual story of one of the youngest survivors of Auschwitz. Tova Friedman was born in 1938, so just in the mouth of the Second World War. And she grew up in a Polish ghetto, hemmed in on all sides and really strictured circumstances. And her parents were sent to a work camp when she was 4 years old, and she followed them there. And when she was in the work camp, the children were selected again, and selected is where the Nazis just took people off for the gas chambers. And Tova actually her parents hid her in the work camp for quite a considerable period, and she made it through that. But she did eventually end up in Auschwitz. And she did survive. And her story of survival isn't just really surviving that incredible journey of just 6 years pre-war, post-war, but she's still alive. And, she's writing now, she gives her testimony as a way of bearing witness to all the people who didn't make it out, the 1.5 million Jewish children who didn't make it home or who didn't grow up.
It's fascinating to dig through what trauma and the generational trauma that comes from those events. I think both you and I were talking about just, yes, it's not an easy read, but it's a read that needs to be read.
It feels really important. I usually try and read one book a year that really catches me by the throat, if you know what I mean. And this not being fiction, this being someone's testimony makes it super powerful. And I think the other side of it is she's not just saying I'm a survivor, but she talks a lot about how therapy and family and standing as as witness to what happened to her has been a really important part of her journey of survival and thriving after the war. So it is a tough read. It's really harrowing. I mean, there are some scenes in this that would just gut you.
They take your breath away.
They do. You have to put this book down at times and really compose yourself. But I think, once you go, that's real people in real lives, it brings you back in a way you might not with fiction. You're not being manipulated at all here by Tova. Tova is telling a really important story on the behalf of millions of children. Well,
you and I read it for the show. Who should be reading this, do we think?
I actually was quite astonished to discover that Tova she'd read a survey of European and American teens that was done fairly recently, and an astonishing amount of them, I can't remember the exact number, had not heard of the Holocaust, did not know how many millions of Jews had died, and actually some of them had quite anti-Semitic viewpoints. And I just think it's really important. I mean, for me, the war feels like a kind of a live thing. My grandfather spent the war in a prisoner of war camp in Poland, and I grew up with this really strong sense that there were camps and that there was a war and that terrible things had happened. And he stood testimony to his own story, and I've always felt it really important to learn about how that happened, to make sure that's something that you can recognise it. Recognise the types of movements that happen, and to nip them in the bud if you can.
Yeah, it's how brutally honest she is. We talked about that and that level of trauma, where something that you'll read in certain pieces that you feel that you have to put down the book after, but also she talks about it so matter of fact that's what takes your breath away.
Yeah, and it's almost like there are so many pages here where even a chapter you go into, not even a chapter, you go into a paragraph and she talks about something that's so horrific that your mind really struggles to kind of go, that happened, and not did that just happen, that paragraph, that happened 6 million, however many times over again. But I do think the really interesting thing in this is about finding a reason to survive something like this, and how her parents and her family, the family members who did survive, because on her mother's side, 150, the whole family was wiped out, how they got a vision, how they managed to go to America and make a new life for themselves, she managed to have children, how did she raise children when, as she points out, as a mum, she didn't know how to play with her kids because she'd never played when she was a kid.
And I find that was out of all the horrific things that are happening, it's the legacy of that trauma that continues within her children and her grandchildren. And obviously what she wanted to put this in a book as her legacy to them.
Yeah.
But to realise that it might have been so many years ago, but it still affects her family and generationally time and time and time again every day.
It does. But she thinks she was raised by a mother who, as part of her survival tactic in the work camps and in the death camps, was never to turn her daughter's face away from the horror. And one of the reasons she feels she survived is because her mum had that strength of mind to say, look at what's happening all around you. This is what's happening. So even when Tova was actually taken to the gas chambers, was literally walked past her mother one day in the gas chambers, and her mother said, but where are you going? And she said, oh, I'm off to be gassed. And she's like, almost jaunty about it. She's like, she didn't understand why her mother was upset, because she knew this is what was going to happen to a Jewish child. Yeah. And it's about not turning your face away from the horror so that you can actually stand up to it, or that you can have some sort of sense of seeing what's happening rather than turning your face away.
Yeah, so I suppose so many stories around this time try to focus on the resilience of it. And I think her honesty in it of going, yes, I have survived and I have lived, but also it has affected everything in my life. And I think there's something comforting about that, to go that we don't have to leave those past things behind.
She didn't leave the past. Very much her survival tactic afterwards was to get therapy, and she did actually become a therapist. She's someone who worked with people very solidly to say, what happened to you? Do you want to talk about it? Here's how we can frame it. So it's a very strong sort of, it's a really strong story to anybody who's been a survivor, that you might be tough to survive, but afterwards it's not weak to seek therapy or to seek help or to seek love.
That's beautiful, yeah. It's a wonderful, powerful book, and I hope you all read it.